really. This, everything that we consider solid, everything that we consider real, that's from the juxtaposition from Einsteinian relativity with what are the 5 bases, which are 5 more dimensions. So we actually have a 9-dimensional reality. We have 3 dimensions of space, the 4th dimension of space-time, or time, that of the Einsteinian, and then that is all juxtaposed with the 5 dimensions of base, and they are dimensions. However, this, as much as it's fun to do ray physics for breakfast, which is what Ra used to do, he would do those first thing in the morning with his cup of coffee. He loved to do the physics first thing in the morning. We're actually going to start another avenue. We're going to start, maybe not fully microcosmically, but we're going to start a little more personally, at least in the human story. The story of human evolution is something that fascinated Ra. For those of you who've seen the theory that he was a reincarnation of William Quan Judge of the Theosophical Society, they look almost identical.
I have seen that.
William Quan Judge was also fascinated by this, and I have a book from the 1850s from him or somewhere in there where he's talking about, the basically evolutionary. It's the diaspora out of Africa. And what's so great about human design is that if you study anthropology, if you study cultural anthropology, anything, even colonial studies and a lot of really advanced, critical theory and stuff like that, it's all very compatible. Like, human design's not telling you this stuff came from Atlantis and Lemuria. It's telling you, like, this is our human life. This is our human condition. And so I'm going to tell the story of base from the story of the human condition, starting from that side of it. And it's not even going to necessarily be personal. I mean, if you happen to know your base, you can kind of see your role in that in the bigger picture. But what we're really going to do is we're just going to go through bases 1 through 5, and we're going to kind of just talk about some of the associations, some of the themes, and some of what they are as part of an evolutionary movement. I'll also say that I like to think of base in terms of no choice, not free will versus determinism, no choice. No choice of, we always have the illusion that there's something on the other side or something else out there, but there's no choice in that we are really stuck with one particular history. And part of this does come up in post-colonial theory, decolonial studies, things like that, with the question of the Western canon. It's my hypothesis that the so-called Western canon, because of systemic erasure and systemic racism, because of the 7-centered reality that we've all inherited, there has been erasure of Black, Indigenous, people of color throughout history that were at key junctures. Nevertheless, the Western canon, they were there at the key junctures. Those key junctures were always points of mutation. Look at the birth of jazz in New Orleans, look at the birth of... So I guess what I'm trying to say, like, any big movement has always been extremely diverse and multicultural, and it's actually part of that genetic movement of these clashing of cultures, however it occurs, that causes that. So part of the no choice is that we all have this fantasy that there was some undiscovered Shakespeare in some remote part of the world, but the fact of the matter is, that part of that time in London was a very diverse and a very culturally explosive time, culturally mutative time, and so on. I have a little idea here with my, Gate 11. I'll probably never do it, but if anyone ever wants to make a coffee table book, Taschen style, called Mutative Cores, where you just track mutative cores throughout history, and you do try to find non-Western canon mutative cores as much as you can. And you just look through this whole history of mutation. But that's what I'm going to tell the story now today of base theory. And I want to kind of think back to, like, out of Africa, there was a diaspora where, people's, really, the 7-centered being peopled the earth out of Africa. And there were these different movements. There was movement across the Bering Strait. There were these movements that occurred, and then after the movements there was the building that occurred, and then there was the culture that emerged out of that, and then the customs and everything that was designed out of that, and then really truly the illusion of something that had always been there to begin with that you just take for granted. That's the finishing touch. So I just walked through for those who know the base keynotes, bases 1 through 5. I just walked through those keynotes. Now we're going to do them kind of slowly. So the base 1 keynote of movement. What is it? What are the base 1 people doing? These are the people who are not content to stay in the place that's been discovered. So we can go 40,000 years ago. It was the base 1 people who went across the Bering Strait who peopled this land here that we are now in. This is Tewa land. And, in some sense it still is and will always be Tewa land, because I think when you live in a place for that long, it is always your land. You live over 40,000 years, right? But the fact of the matter is, the base 1 people who came here then got bored of being here and went on to people other lands. The base 1 is movement. It's movement. It's as simple as that. It is the double yang. So if we think of what it is to be double yang, the double yang cannot cooperate. It doesn't know anything about cooperation. We can think of yang as force, and we can think of yin as cooperation. And I know they don't seem like a very easy match, but it's going to make more sense when we Obviously these things take on different qualities for 9-centered versus 7-centered, and so much of the paradigm of the history of bass. See, this is the thing. These are the fundamental building blocks. Whether you're 3-centered, 5-centered, 7-centered, 9-centered, it doesn't make a difference. These fundamental building blocks, these are actually the diagrams that make up the hexagrams of the I Ching. We're on bass 1. That's yang yang. That diagram is 2 yang lines, 2 unbroken lines. There's no cooperation here. There's only force here. And so, but what it's trying to do is it's trying to discover something new. It's trying to go into, and then if you try to kind of imagine it or visualize what bass 1 is like, Ra said it's like a wriggling maggot. It's life, but it's not yet human. It's just wriggling. It's just wanting to just live. It's just wanting to burst forth into whatever new untouched part of nature there is that it can discover. And so the bass 1s can be very depressed now because there's nothing left to discover. There's nothing left. Some of them are going looking for remote, uncontacted peoples in the Amazon. But most bass 1s, like my business partner Michael Steenbeck Litvin, when I met him, he was working at a bookstore where he was listening to some really obscure like Enya music with a Japanese voiceover and then car sounds like and all this stuff. And I go, what is this? And he says, oh, it's I think this one's a Honda Civic commercial from the early 90s from Japan. He had found and ripped all of these like soundtracks of old Japanese car commercials from the 90s. And that was his, he was Vaporwave like 10 years before Vaporwave was even a word. Like he just like embodied all of this because the movement is now to the most obscure. On his 25th birthday, he had a request for everyone, which was to listen to like a 45-minute crazy avant-garde noise, something like the Boredoms. It wasn't that, it was more obscure, but like some avant-garde noise music where we're all just sitting there like, great Mike, okay, and it's like, they are the ones, you can take bass and you can apply it to any film, any song, any band, and you can start to break it down into fifths. And this is something I want you just to kind of think about as a side note, and then we'll get back to our story of evolution. But you can start breaking it down in the sense that you can say like, if there's 5 people getting together and they're all bass 1, they're gonna make some weird avant-garde stuff. But then if you can have mixes. Like if there's like only one bass 1 person and the rest of it's bass 5, which as we see when we get there is kind of the icing on the cake, the cherry on top, it's a lot of pop and sugary stuff. Then that would be like a very sugary pop person, like maybe Billie Eilish, who nevertheless has this first bass, a little bit, 20%, just a little sprinkle of this weird, I'm not sure that she does, but I'm just saying as an example, that's like when you have a little bit of the freaky, weird, avant-garde, experimental noise, atonal stuff mixed into something else. And as we see as we go through the basses, they each have a character or a quality to them. And in fact, it's not just my own original research that you can kind of split things up into 20s. That's something Ross said, is that, you can go a little, he had to stop his bass research, he said, because you can go a little mad with it once you see that it's literally the structuring principle of everything. And for those familiar with what's called the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, I didn't prepare enough in the sense that I wanted to have like a bunch to rattle off, but I'll just give you an example. A common one is that 80% of the revenue of a business is from 20% of the customers, and that's true across the board of the business. There's a lot of other ones that I'm trying to find if are true, but I would imagine 80% of the people born in history are from 20% of the women who've ever been alive in history. It's another interesting one, because you see a lot of women who are very fertile and you see women who are not. And so there's a lot of 80-20s out there, and you can discover them in terms of bass when you start to see, for instance, Ra thought that, hypothesized also that around 80% or 90% of bass 3s, which as we're going to get to is the double yin, were incarnated in female bodies. Or assigned female at birth. And that gets into some interesting things with body dysphoria and things like that, because what if you are? Al Pacino is a bass 3, the double yin. It's interesting. So we'll get to that in a moment. Yeah, and I just watched Serpico again. It was so good. But in any case, so you can start to see things in terms of breaking them down in terms of the bass. But to do that, we have to kind of characterize the bass a little more. So going back to bass 1, this is the double yang. Its statement is kind of I define. It's about defining, and if you think about what defining is, it is about that movement of getting nittier and grittier and down into more and more subdivision, more and more obscure genres, and more differentiation. Really, it is the beginning of that differentiation, the movement that causes differentiation. It says, we all live in this town. Well, I'm bass 1. I'm going to go live over that hill over there. There's nobody over there, and you guys can't stop me. I'm just going to go live there and check it out. And they get there, and a couple years later, oh, well, okay, a bunch of people showed up. This sucks now. I got to go somewhere else. That's what bass 1 is. They're not really interested in cooperating. They're not really interested in building a world with people. These are the people who like free climb a mile up with no ropes, just for the thrill of it. These are the people who want to do the thing nobody else has done because they just want to do something new or different. So base two is the eldest brother, and that's a yang yin. So we could call it, that's cooperation in the service of force. So it's still predominantly yang. It's still in the service of force, but it's using cooperation as a means to an end. The end goal is not cooperation yet. I mean, I'm base two. The end goal is something that I want to build. The base twos are the builders. So the base twos have ornamented, even if you look at the glyph, I wish I had it to show everybody, but it looks like a little thing and it has little dots on it, and those dots you can think of like ornaments, like on a Christmas tree. Like, that's what base two are, the people who made Christmas ornaments. We're the ones who ornament everything. We're the ones who, like, the base ones go there. And by the way, what's interesting is you'll find that the two types of men and the two types of women are diametrically opposed. Yet they each get along with each other. I get along with both kinds of women, but I do not get along, even though I'm business partners with base ones, with the other kind of men, because we're just so contrary. I mean, I love Mike to death, and like, it's a funny thing to say you don't get along, but we just are not. This is not a fundamentally, we're opposed. If you look at the base mat, 1 and 2 are opposite of each other. So I'm base 2. So my experience of it is, I'm not really interested in going to the new place or doing the new thing. What I'm interested in is building something. So the base 2 people, they really, as soon as they start building or making, we have status. And in fact, there are 3 fundamental aspects of status. This is where all people love to hate on status. They love to hate on Beyonce and Jay-Z, and they love to hate on all the glamour and glitz. They love to hate on all the nice Maseratis and whatever. But the fact of the matter is, this is no choice. This is no choice here. This stuff did not randomly, it's not some conspiracy because some rich people were like, we're going to screw people over by creating this whole thing. I mean, when we get to base 4, we will see that there are a lot of people out there who designed things, and there are a lot of people, and that designs it'll be really spooky. We'll get a little spooky when we get to base 4. But as long as we're in base 2, she knows what I mean. So as long as we're in base 2, though, I'll just say, people love to talk bad about status, and there is a very bad version of it, but again, these are fundamentals that have existed, there's fundamental hierarchies. So status has to do with 3 things at a fundamental level, which are the ornamentations, what covers your body, your mode of transportation, and where you live. And that's been since the very beginning. People used to carry people around on blankets and stuff, on a rug. That was your mode of transportation. That was your status. You had like 4 people as your wheels or whatever. I mean, you would hunt, and then somebody gets the most amazing pelt or something, and that was your status, was the status of the tribal elder who has the most incredible pelt, the most incredible eagle head. I would see these, elders at the powwows I go to that have eagle heads on a stick. If you've never seen a bald eagle head on a stick, that's some power. That's some status. That's status right there. It's the ornamentation, and the way they dress and the ornamenting. And I mean, so the clothing, I mean, this is what I mean by no choice also. Like, don't just think free will versus determinism. Think this is all there is. There's nothing else out there. Like, just get used to it, because this is kind of, I mean, we can have fun with it, we can change it in certain ways, but we also are working with the same fundamental building blocks. And then of course we have, all architecture, all building of every statue, of every idol, of every giant Buddha, of every whatever it is. That's also the base 2. So that's also a form of status. That's showing this is the status of our God. This is the status of what we, it's just having ornamented the world. And that's what base 2 does. It just wants to settle and ornament the world, and then work on a bunch of like FDR projects. Like, that's all it really cares about. You know what I mean? Like let's, because it's cooperation in the service of, purpose and force and all this stuff. As we see when we get to base 4 later, it's the other way around. It's force in the service of cooperation. It's really interesting. It's really interesting. That's why I say it's going to get spooky. It gets to, concentration camps and prisons and all the designs you can design that make people, that force people to cooperate. Forced cooperation is a very scary thing. If you're cooperating in order to work together for force, it's different. You get to choose to cooperate. You get to choose whether to comply or not, or at least, have some sort of, your own inner authority does it. I mean, when we get to base 4, we'll see that those are the ones that are really robbing, or that are creating systems that prevent people from even accessing their inner authority. And yet, Ra was a base 4. I mean, it's funny. It's a funny joke. We'll see when we get there. So I'm going to do a little bit of characterization of personality here. I'm not going to do it for all of them, but just for base 2, because I know it pretty well. When you look at the keynotes, so first of all, base 2 is the principle of mind. And being the principle of mind sounds kind of funny. You go, well, what does mind have to do with all this physical accumulation of all these things? You know, mind for Ra is almost a material substance. When he's talking about base, he's talking about dimensions. I mean, it's like the dimension of mind. It's like, he talks about it the same way we talk about like other dimensions. It's a really interesting thing. It's a really interesting kind of obscure point. But one little point I'll make though is that as mind, it's very, very hard to wake up a base 2. All the base 2s, we give ourselves, you know, us undefined ego base 2s anyway, give ourselves a little pat on the back. We're so good, yeah. Because Ra says that basically the fact of the matter is, you know, 1 in 5 people, 20% of the people out there, the base 2s, are not really going to be at friction with the not self world, because we're the principle of mind. So I could be 23 years old working at Amazon and just moving like water off a duck's back through these corporate systems, through this not self-mind world. Everybody else is struggling and saying my life sucks and I've had all this trauma and all this pain, and I'm like, mind. Oh, more mind and more status and more, like, it's like the mind, like the not self world. The 2 is so, and the funny thing that the 2 and the 4 are the ones that actually you see this. If you look at the base mats on the personality and design side, the 2 and the 4 are in the same position. And the 1, 3, and 5 are in different positions. They're like disjunct from each other. This is a little bit of an obscure point, so I won't go into it too much. But I'll just say that you can even see how the positions of the bases themselves, the 2 and the 4, are in these like privileged positions of like not needing to wake up as much because they have their own thing going on. And I'll talk about the 4s too, whereas the 1s, 3s, 5s are out there going, I'm suffering, I'm in pain, I have all these problems, nothing's working. Oh my God, human design is transforming my life. The 2, like me, finds that it takes me 9 years later till I'm actually having a crisis. You know, for 9 years, I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I don't need this stuff. What is this? I'm making money. I have life. I have my happiness. I have my whatever. I have my mind stuff. And it's only then you get to these pits of frustration again and again and again, have some dark night of the soul experience, that the 2 finally wakes up and goes, okay, this is all a sham. This was all a lie. Undefined solar plexus. I've been living a lie. You know, all this stuff. So, yeah. So in any case, you know, but base 2 is this principle of mind. Now, just to go through the keynotes, you know, we start to. Yeah, it's like you can see at a personality level that it's about character. And, you know, we think, like, some people, we don't know their birth times, like Von Paul. Who here has met Von Paul? Okay, everyone's met Von Paul. Okay. No, maybe not everyone, but okay. He's a real character. He's a real character. And the thing is, like, I don't know his base, but I'm betting he's a base too. Because when you start to look at, this is the funny thing, is you can almost do rectification through base more easily than tone, because tone gets locked at the color level and doesn't get through. But base somehow permeates the person's, like, every single life they've ever had throughout their entire, since the Big Bang. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a different thing. It's like, especially when people talk about their past lives and so on, they're always the same base. They're always the same base. People have all sorts of past life stuff. You say, what's the commonality? What's the common thread of all these? That can help rectify base. I mean, that's what's interesting, right? It's like tone is locked behind color because of transference. Base, actually, you start to see it. So, like, we don't know Von's birth time, but when I start talking about character, you can start to see, because there are keynotes of whether you're living your design or not. This will be funny for you. You got to see me at 4 hours of sleep after I picked you up at the airport, kind of go off on a 3839 who hates human design and is always challenging me. And I was like, you do not know he's a 39.4 too. And I was like, you're just externalizing. You're a hypocrite. You're 4.6 on the roof. You're a hypocrite. I don't know. I was like going off on him. But you'll see that this is part of base 2 keynotes, is that when you look at it, so what is character about? Well, character ultimately is about separation, and separation is standing apart from everyone else. And if you think about it, like, I would guess that base 2 people can just get jobs as character actors. Like, I just assume, without zero evidence whatsoever, but it just makes intuitive sense to me that, like, Wallace Shawn or like any like character actor who everyone's just like, you know, they recognize them, they don't know their name, but they're just like, so they have a look. I mean, base 2 people are the kinds that are, we have separation, we have distinguishing features. I mean, we often have distinguishing looks, we have distinguishing expressions, we have distinguishing, and we're characters. And that separation is standing apart from the group. Now, what happens in that separation, we discover our nature. This is not nature channel nature. This is our temperament nature. No, it is. It's our temperament. It's our good nature. It's our broad nature. It's our patience. People say, how can you put up with that person? How did you let them live with you for a month? How did you have infinite patience with that person? How did you, but again, the not self, base 2s are the ones that can go off on someone, going off on a server, going off in traffic, going off because of a line, going off because of the littlest thing. I mean, I've seen Von, when he was kicked out of a farmer's market, go off to the point I thought they were going to call the cops, you know? But again, I've also seen him, I've known him 8 years now, and the human design virus has gotten into him begrudgingly, and now he doesn't initiate a lot, and he waits a lot more he used to initiate all the time, being an MG, you know, he was very, this urge to just tell people off and act and all this stuff. But anyway, so you can see that after, so character is about separation, standing apart. Separation is about nature. You're to temper your nature as a base 2, or I am tempering my nature. We temper our natures. And then out of that, what we actually have to integrate. We have integration, that's coming back and reintegrating and learning how to work together towards that common yang goal. As we've tempered our nature. It's like, I've been alone for years. We go through like, base 2s will go through like a 7-year, process of being alone out in the wild, out in their separation, and then have their nature, be tested again and again and again, and then tempered again and again and again, and our ability to like not go off. And then basically when we, eventually come back, when we have integration, the final keynote is spirit. That's what we bring. And for Ra, spirit is enthusiasm. Spirit is passion. In theos, the word enthusiasm is the God within. Theo, from where you get like theology, all that stuff. So, that's what spirit means. Here, spirit in human design, usually what Ra means is a passion or an enthusiasm or a real excitement or just a real gusto. Gusto, the wind, the spirit, the Holy Spirit, all that. So that's base 2. Base 3 is double yin. And so base 3. I've found so many base 3s who have 59.6 or who have interestingly, you find a lot of base 3s. There's a lot of weird coincidences between affinities, almost like certain bases like certain channels. Because base 3, Ra postulated, would have 80 to 90% female births and is the mother. It's the mother. Base 1 is the father, double yang. Base 2 is the eldest brother, yang yin. Now we're at yin yin. Base 3. These are the diagrams. These are the fundamental. You can start to break down gates in terms of these, which bases they are put together to make this. Obviously, gate 2 is mother, mother, mother. It's yin, yin, yin. Yeah. So, it's just, you can see it, right? Base 1 is father, father, father. Gate 1, is base 1 3 times. Right? You start to kind of break these things down in the diagrams. So now that we're at, now that we're at base 3, we've already settled in a new place. We've already built a bunch of stuff. We built the churches, and we built the kind of idols. Now we have to get along. And this is not an easy task. Yin is cooperation in the service of cooperation. This is like just straight up cooperation. We need to cooperate. What's interesting is in the last round, the last 27,000 years, the gender of our universe was decided. And it was female. And so part of that is that cooperation, that the double yang are being destroyed because they have no cooperation. Only the bases that have cooperation are sticking around. Because, whether it's forced cooperation or whether it's cooperation in the service of a goal or whether it's just straight up cooperation, these are the bases that are now kind of approved for our cosmos, for our program, because of the gender being decided in this sort of evolutionary process. If you think of our kind of cosmos as an unborn living entity, the gender isn't decided in the human fetus for a period of time. Same with our cosmos. It was decided in the last round. And that's why we have, what we're in now. As a side joke, when we get to base 4, base 4 is the eldest daughter. And that's the one that I'm saying is kind of scary. That's where all the designs of all the prisons came from, of all the, and all the schools and everything that everybody's the system, that's all base 4. And what's funny is our universe is not only female, it's base 4. And when you start to think about what base 4 is, and I'll get to it in a moment, start to describe it, it's the eldest daughter. And it's kind of almost like an Enneagram 4, for those of you who know Enneagram, this kind of moody, tormented, pained, angsty, and it's this eldest daughter. And so I told Mike about it. I said, we're in a base 4 universe. He said, so you're saying that we're living inside of an angsty teenage girl who only listens to goth and heavy metal? And then I said, well, look at the greatest works of art. We're at this Renaissance right before the door closes. Yeah. And we have Kentaro Miura, who just passed away, who wrote the Berserk series, one of the greatest manga artists of all time. It's all super gory, grotesque. Look at George R.R. Martin, who lives just 2 miles from us and wrote Game of Thrones. It's all, incest and murder and whatever. It's, this is the world we live in. These are the great works of art that we have. It's very base 4 stuff. War comes from base 4. Because you see, there's no war yet. Base 1 is let's go there. Base 2 is let's build and have status. They don't care about war. Base 3 says, let's all get along. Base 4 says, we're going to force you to get along. And it's a very different thing when you try to force other people to get along. So, but the base 3, let's just stop there for a minute. So the double yin, what is the yin about? It's about cooperating. It's about getting along. Ross said something interesting here. He said that really the way the double yin could actually flourish, and that there were matriarchal societies for so long before the kind of patriarchy a few thousand years ago took over with its four-element theory even. Ra even links the patriarchy to the four temperaments in the ancient Greeks and the four-element theory. It said this was a erasure of the five elements of the Chinese and of the five bases, which connect to five-element theory. I mean, he talks about this in the base materials. He links it to the five elements and saying, the ancient pre-four-element theory, people had it right, and then it was kind of covered up and so on. Probably because some base four designed it that way. Anyway, I'm joking. I'm really crapping on the base fours today. But Ra was a base four. We have human design thanks to a base four. So
Wasn't he not sure of his base though? Wasn't he questioning?
He's definitely base four. Nobody convinced me he's not base four. I mean, maybe, but I mean, he would definitely say that he had double yang to be destroyed at certain times, this and that. But I mean, he had some. I mean, we'll have to talk about it. But he just. I mean, I don't think anyone else could have made human design. When you go so deep, I also don't think he fully understood base. I mean, he did, but he kind of shied away from it. He freaked out because it started sending him to a really crazy place. I mean, Ra would talk backwards for a week sometimes. I mean, Ra was in a fragile place of his life where he didn't need to go any deeper. He needed to bring stuff out for people to use, So he saw that, and he kind of left base and pointed at it to people and said, "Hey, this is for you to dig in if you dare." So, but base three, the thing Ra said about that is that really what this principle of cooperation. What helps cooperation more than anything else for humans, and this is predominantly led by the feminine, because again, he hypothesized 80-90% of base three will be, but it's also, I want you to think about Al Pacino. Who's seen any young Al Pacino? Al Pacino, actually old Al Pacino, any Al Pacino, he is the base three, and can't you imagine, so what Ross said is basically, base three could really flourish for so long in these matriarchal societies and in these cooperative, agricultural, and so on, through basically the leaving behind the evolutionary remnant of the mating season. That the seven-centered being, he hypothesized that Neanderthal probably as a five-centered being still had a mating season. And that as soon as you get to the seven-centered about 300,000 years ago, still before language, before the dropping of the larynx, but 200,000 years ago, you get to the seven-centered being, you get, what you get is the universalization of mating, the availability to mate. And so that this creates cooperation. That they're there, honey. And can't you imagine Al Pacino? They have a fight, and he's like, "Let's just have sex." He's like, he doesn't even say it. I mean, it's just like base threes don't even have to say it. They just put off this ability to use sex to completely make you forget about any and all conflict or problem or anything and just all get along.
Bonobos, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, they're all base three. Everybody. No. I've wondered if certain. Well, what's that?
59.6 them.
Yeah, just 59.6 them. Just you're not really that mad. Come on. You're not really that mad. I mean, you can see Al Pacino doing this. That's what I'm saying. He has a very precise birth time. I've been making a database of AA Rodin rated super precise birth times, and then also where they're not on a cusp because base changes every 9 minutes, but you can find where they're 48% into a base or 62% in. And you can see, they're born at 5:47 a.m. It's probably not more than 5 minutes on either side off. We're pretty dang sure he's a base three, and also it's cool to see a guy base three because it's different than the stereotype, but you can kind of see it, you can kind of tell. He has this ability to just get you to cooperate with him, not just because he's a manifestor 5-1, which I'm sure helps. Okay, I think he is, but anyway, but right.
That's what I'd like to know.
But okay, so then we get to base four.
But is there a femininity, or what is it about that you're bringing in?
The double yin? Oh, just that, it's just interesting that most base three people, Ra hypothesized, would be women, and also probably mothers. So most of the mothers are probably, more people probably have base three mothers than any other base. It could even be an 80-20 rule. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if 80% of mothers are base three, because it just happens that way. It just happens that way. You just get big mother energy from these women.
Is the maternal energy in men that have base three as well? Or?
Well, that's what I'm saying about Al Pacino. You be the judge. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem even paternal as much as it seems on the not self side, manipulative, using sex and using sex appeal and to get somebody to cooperate with you. I mean, that's the other side of it, right? These are all a duality. So it can be, or using just all of that softness and gentleness with the other person to say, you don't really want to fight. It's all about cooperation at any cost. These are also the people who will cooperate no matter how bad the person they're cooperating is with. These are the people who stick around. It can be as not self again. This is a very fundamental building block. It's a very fundamental building block of what it takes to be human. We have to have 20% of us have to be willing to cooperate at any cost. Yeah. At any cost. They have to cooperate no matter what. And that's the base threes. And they get everybody else to cooperate too. Now, the base four, I've been saying, is the spooky one. The base four is the other one hard one to wake up. Why is it hard to wake up to base four? It's the voice of I design. So base four comes along and it says, okay, very well. You've all come to here, you've made this place, you like wriggling life forms or whatever, base ones. And then the base 2 people, you all care about status. Nobody else really cares. You're the ones who are like, I have the bigger house, I have the nicer car, whatever. Nobody gives a crap. Then you have the base 3s come along, and the base 3s are like, okay, well, let's all at least build our PTA meetings and so on, but they're not really organized. They're really just getting along with whoever happens to be there. The base 4 says, okay, it's time to build. You can't just live like this. We need to build a grid. I was just in Salt Lake City. It was a base 4 who said 1 hectare for every family or whatever, and it's like a grid. They call it Grid City, and you end up with weird things like you're on 9th and 9th South or 9th and 9th East. Like there's a lot of weird, like there's like multiple 9th and 9ths and like multiple 7th and 7ths. Like, I mean, it's just, someone designed it, some crazy base 4 designed it. But everything that's designed, everything that's organized, everything that's like, this is a rule, this is a law, this is a structure, this is, the thing is we start to get the understanding of the body and of sustenance and of material. Base 3 is the one that says we need food. You have all this care about status and you're doing your whole yang waving contest over there. We need food, we need support for the, base 3 is the one that's doing that. But then base 4 comes along and is like, yeah, and we're going to get it because we're going to force them to give it to us. In fact, we're going to get all these people to go over and kill all those people so that they stop taking our food from here and stop hunting. And base 4 is where we get war, it's where we get all the planning. This is where we really see the strategic nature, because base 4 is the base of ego. It's the base of ego, and it's the base that says, I don't need anybody else. 1 in 5 people is going to say, I inherently feel correct with zero justification whatsoever. If anyone's seen the new superhero TV show Loki, it's absolutely hilarious. Have you seen it? Okay, so it's so funny. He's a base 4 AF. He literally, he's literally like, they're like, why do you think you should run Asgard or Midgard or whatever? He's like, because I am me. I'm the greatest person who's ever lived. I mean, obviously, there's no, this goes deeper than defined or undefined ego. I see people with undefined ego who are base 4 who believe they're the greatest thing who ever lived. People with defined ego, base 4. This is they just believe that they are correct, and they design. Ra would never have taken human design from anybody. Human design would never have reached him. If somebody else designed it, somebody else built it.
Okay.
They build it. They give it their words. I tell base 4s who are actually getting into human design, although I don't usually see that, to write their own keynotes, make their own relationship with the planets, write their own version of it. Because if they aren't clear that that's what they're doing, they're going to just pick and choose and then pretend it's human design, and it's not. They've designed something entirely new, and they need to design something entirely new, and that's them. And they should just name it something new and not pretend that they're doing human design. So I mean, that's all I'm trying to say is 1/5 of people out there. And so Ra calls the 2s and the 4s the hardest to wake up. The 4s just don't care because they didn't make it themselves. The 2s, are just so smoothly operating that they don't really have a lot of friction. They're not really getting, all the not self stuff. It'd be like, this is so bad. And probably in 2006, I was like, no, it's not. Crybabies. Because for me, I'm like, this is what? I just got a new car. I have a new status now. So okay, and then but base 4, they design, they build the systems, they build the worlds. Oh, I love in Loki, to get it back to that, where I absolutely love how he then has Owen Wilson, probably base 2, total character, very good natured. Hi, you're the 7th Loki this week, because it's very interdimensional, and he's like, you're not the greatest Loki. I mean, I actually got you to help me catch this much greater Loki who's destroying universes out there. You got he's like, what? There's another Loki? This is the great horror for the base 4s that they all feel like they're undeniably unique. They can be unique just like we all can through differentiation, but they're the same in their I am unique just because I am. No, I mean, we're all cut from this archetypal cloth. That's what differentiation is. That's what individuation is. It's becoming different, becoming more yourself. We all have the seed that has to grow into the tree, So, but in any case, that brings me to base 5. We're right in the middle. It's perfect. Jenny is a base 5. Oh, you're also base 5. Okay, Rachel's base 5. So with base 5, Ross says, a nice signpost for base 5 people is that, they're the ones who, when they're not living their design, you never remember if they're at the party or not. But then they take on the greatest amount of personality, because what base 5 is really the polish. There's no there's no yin yang on any of these. Base 4 is the yin yang, the last one that has any sort of keynote in that sense. Base 5 is an illusion that exists in the middle of the bases, and it's really the illusion of personality. It's the illusion of space. It's the illusion of the acoustic phenomenon. This is not some abstract thing. It sounds very abstract, but I'm going to make it very realistic to you. Go into a movie theater with the full surround sound, with the big thing. All they're trying to do is create the base 5 experience. Notice how much acoustics play a role. You're watching a David Lynch movie and he lights the match and it goes, and you see the cigarette, it goes, and you hear the cigarette burn. That sort of hyper zoom in is what the bass 5 effect is.
And then you
It
can
is-
smell sulfur.
Yeah, right.
Even though you're in a movie theater.
Right, exactly. No, and it's totally, it's like fully immersive in presence. And so bass 5 is really what it's coming along saying is like, once the other 4 are in place, everything starts to move. And what you get with 5, so 5 is, it's really funny because I studied personality typology, and I studied, character and all these things, and bass 2 is character, and bass 5 is type. And it's kind of a weird keynote. You think, what's the difference in character and type? But then you see type is fantasy. Well, when a bass 5 is really living their type, or many types, but I mean, they become a sort of girl next door type, a rock star type, an adventurer poet type, this type, that type. Like, I know a bass 5, Daniel Blue of Moto Pony. You can listen to his music on Spotify. He has 10 million plays in his song. He has people all over the world starry-eyed over him, falling in love with him, falling head over heels for him as a personality, as a type, as a sort of emotional, deep, introspective singer type who has these heartfelt songs, and his type is fantasy. It just gets the fantasy moving. And what's interesting is I've had people in relationships with bass 5s confide in me that other people don't really know, but like our sex life is incredible, or like you would not even imagine the amount of fantasy that comes out of the richness of embodying this type. So as a sort of keynote of really stepping into being the personality, this is, again, at a macrocosmic level, this is where we get the kind of, illusion of the personality. I'll kind of end on another nice little beautiful side note here, which is just when you start looking at the basses and the keynotes, you can start to kind of see how it all works together, how it fits together. Bass 2 is the principle of mind. Bass 1 is the principle of movement, which you can think of as the life force itself. Strategy and authority, even for a manifestor, is built into bass because it has to go through the design. Bass 4. The mind has to access the design, get in touch with the design, listen to the design, whatever the design is, any design. And that is the strategy and authority accessing bass 1 movement. The movement can't get to it directly. But you start to see these really beautiful little things. Bass 5 is in everything. Bass 5 can access everything. Bass 5 can listen to the crazy avant-garde music of the bass 1 and totally get it. It can hang out and listen to the really character type music of the bass 2 and totally get it. It can, and funny enough, bass 5, some of its keynotes have to do with music itself. It shows that frequency, music, sound, acoustic environment, the illusion, and presence are all ultimately the icing on the cake that wraps up the other 4 aspects of humanity, puts a bow on them, puts a sheen on them, and makes them an impenetrable sort of thing that seems like it has always existed and always will exist. It just seems so obvious and so endless. All right, thanks everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonah.